My wife's brother, the CEO's son, stole my login to access my files, but I had already replaced them with fake data. Tomorrow, he will present it to our biggest client, while I sit in the front row, waiting for the perfect moment his lies explode. My name is Oliver Price, and if you're expecting some kind of hero origin story, let me stop you right there, because the most heroic thing I've done this week is remember to water my plants. Well, water is a strong word. More like I stood near them with a glass and felt guilty enough that some moisture probably transferred through sheer awkward energy. I'm 30 years old, which means I'm old enough to know better but still young enough to pretend I don't. I'm married to Rachel Holt Price, who is objectively out of my league in every measurable way, and I manage enterprise projects at Fast Track Solutions, a company that sounds way more exciting than it actually is when you're 6 years deep into PowerPoint purgatory. Let me paint you a picture of how I got here, because every success story needs a montage of suffering, right? 6 years ago, I walked into Fast Track wearing a suit I bought on sale and optimism I definitely overpaid for. I was fresh, eager, and dumb enough to think that hard work and talent would naturally rise to the top like cream in coffee. Spoiler alert, corporate America is not coffee. It's more like that weird office sludge that's been sitting in the break room pot since Tuesday, and you have no idea if it's French roast or just the collective despair of middle management achieving solid form. I paid my dues in the currency of late nights, bad office coffee that could probably strip paint off a Honda Civic, and more slides than you'd find at a children's playground, except way less fun and with significantly more clip art that somebody's boss insisted really pops. I've sat through meetings that could have been emails that should have been never sent, and conference calls where half the participants were clearly shopping online while pretending to take notes. I've nodded thoughtfully at ideas so stupid they probably violated several laws of physics, and I've smiled through performance reviews that felt like someone reading my horoscope, but with more corporate buzzwords and fewer predictions about meeting a tall, dark stranger. My plants at home survive on a combination of my guilt and the ambient moisture from all the takeout containers I forget to throw away. There's a ficus in my living room that I'm pretty sure has developed Stockholm Syndrome. It's been held captive so long it started to identify with its captor. Rachel likes to joke that our apartment looks like a plant hospice, which is funny until you realize she's absolutely right, and also that I'm the world's worst plant nurse. But hey, at least something's thriving on neglect and Chinese food condensation, which is more than I can say for my gym membership. Now, here's where things get deliciously complicated in that why is this my life kind of way. Rachel's family isn't just well known around the office. They basically are the office. Her father, Gregory Holt, runs Fast Track with the kind of iron fist that's wrapped in a velvet glove that's wrapped in a contract you definitely should have read more carefully. Gregory has this handshake that somehow simultaneously says, "We have a deal, I own you now." And by the way, this comes with an inheritance asterisk we'll discuss later. He's in his late 50s, still runs 5 miles every morning like some kind of cardio-obsessed psychopath, and treats the company like it's his 4th child. Which, considering he has 3 actual children, puts it right in the middle of the birth order and explains so much about its middle child energy. Gregory is tough, but fair, usually. He's the kind of boss who'll work you to death, but also remember your birthday, which somehow makes it worse because you can't even hate him properly. He's got this way of looking at you over his reading glasses that makes you want to confess to crimes you haven't even committed yet. "Oliver," he'll say, and somehow my name in his voice sounds like both a compliment and a threat assessment. But here's the thing, I actually respect the guy. He built Fast Track from the ground up, turned it into a legitimate player in the enterprise solutions game, and he did it without turning into a complete cartoon villain. Sure, he's got the typical CEO blind spots, nepotism, anyone? But he's also the reason I have a career that doesn't involve asking people if they want fries with that. The problem, and oh boy is it a problem, is that family and work are doing this uncomfortable tango in my life, and I'm pretty sure someone's about to step on someone's toes so hard that workers' comp won't cover it. I'm married to the boss's daughter, which sounds like a sweet deal until you realize it means every performance review comes with subtext, every promotion gets whispered about near the water cooler, and every mistake I make could theoretically ruin Thanksgiving dinner for the next decade. It's like playing chess except the board is also your family tree, and somehow you're expected to win without sacrificing any pieces that share your last name. Working here means I'm constantly navigating this weird space between being Oliver Price, the guy who earned his stripes through countless late nights and more project plans than should be legal, and being Oliver Price, the dude who married the boss's daughter and therefore must have taken some kind of executive express lane to success. Spoiler, there is no express lane. There's just the same crappy lane everyone else is in, except I get to worry about whether people think I cut in line every single day of my professional life. The office dynamics are basically a sitcom that nobody asked for and everyone's forced to star in. There's Samira, my teammate and partner in sarcasm, who has this incredible ability to say what everyone's thinking, but with enough professional polish that HR can't technically do anything about it. She's the kind of person who brings brutal honesty to every meeting like it's a potluck dish, and honestly, God bless her for it. Then there's Maya, our IT security lead, who is so unflappable I'm pretty sure she could watch the building burn down and still calmly finish her email before evacuating. Maya treats our network security like some people treat their firstborn children, with fierce protectiveness and detailed monitoring that probably violates several privacy conventions. These are my people, my work family, the ones who've seen me at my best when I'm closing deals and making Fast Track look like we actually know what we're doing, and at my worst when I'm 3 cups of terrible coffee deep and trying to explain to a client why their timeline expectations are, to put it professionally, completely divorced from the concept of reality. They're the reason I show up every day, aside from the obvious need to pay my mortgage and keep Rachel in the lifestyle to which she's become accustomed. Read. A lifestyle that includes things like fresh vegetables and toilet paper that doesn't feel like sandpaper. 6 years in, and I'm still here. Still grinding. Still making slides. Still pretending that synergy is a real word that means something. Still married to Rachel. Still working for Gregory. Still trying to prove that I belong here on my own merits and not just because I put a ring on it. It's exhausting, it's complicated, and it's about to get a whole lot messier. But I'm getting ahead of myself. That's a bad habit of mine. Rachel says I tell stories like someone who's already read the ending and can't wait to spoil it. So let me back up and start from where things really began to go sideways, which is basically the moment Rachel's brother entered the picture like a golden retriever who somehow got a business degree and his father's unrestricted blessing to wreak havoc on everything I'd spent 6 years building. That's coming up next. For now, just know this. My name is Oliver Price. I've earned every single thing on my resume, except maybe that proficient in Excel lie we all tell. And I'm about to navigate a family work crisis that makes Thanksgiving arguments about politics look like casual small talk. So here's where my nice, moderately complicated life decided it needed more chaos, like a smoothie that was perfectly fine until someone added kale and pretension. Enter Liam Holt, Rachel's younger brother, Gregory's golden child, and the human equivalent of a LinkedIn influencer post that somehow gained sentience and learned to wear Tom Ford suits. If there's a word that perfectly captures Liam, it's unfailingly confident, which is just a polite way of saying he's never met a room he didn't think was better for having him in it. Liam strolled into Fast Track Solutions on a Tuesday morning. I remember because it was Taco Tuesday, and somehow his arrival ruined even that. Looking like he was auditioning for a toothpaste commercial. Bright smile? Check. Hair that defied both gravity and the concept of bedhead? Check. Suit so perfectly pressed, I'm pretty sure it had never experienced the horror of actual sitting? Double check. The guy radiated the kind of confidence that comes from never having failed at anything, because daddy's money was always there to catch you like the world's most expensive safety net. Stanford degree in hand, which he mentioned approximately 47 times in his first week. Liam arrived with zero humility and maximum entitlement. I'm talking negative humility here, folks. Like, if humility was a bank account, this dude would be overdrawn with insufficient funds fees stacking up. He had this way of walking through the office like he was on a catwalk, and we were all just lucky to be witnessing his journey to the break room. Every step practically echoed with unearned authority. And Gregory? Oh man, Gregory ate it up like it was his last meal. In one of his grand gestures, and trust me, Gregory only does grand gestures. The man doesn't know how to do anything small except maybe his morning espresso. He handed Liam a managerial role overseeing multiple teams. Not one team. Multiple. Plural. As in, This kid who probably still had his Stanford parking permit in his wallet was suddenly in charge of people who'd been grinding in the corporate trenches since before he figured out how to do his own laundry. Cue the eye rolls. And I'm not talking about subtle, professional eye rolls. I'm talking about the kind of eye rolls that could generate renewable energy if we could just harness their power. The entire office simultaneously realized we were living in a nepotism case study that would make business school professors weep into their tenure. Let me tell you about Liam's LinkedIn photo, because it's important character evidence. Perfect lighting that suggested either a professional photographer or a deal with some kind of digital devil. Suspiciously crease-free suit that looked like it had been ironed by angels. That smile. Oh God, that smile. The kind that says, I've never had a door closed in my face because my last name opens them all automatically. His headline probably read something like, Innovative Leader Change Agent Disruptor, which is LinkedIn speak for, I watched 3 TED Talks and now I think I understand business. I spent an embarrassing amount of time studying that photo, trying to figure out what exactly made it so punchable. Was it the confidence? The barely concealed smugness? The fact that his tie was somehow perfect in a way that suggested he'd never actually tied it himself? All of the above? I eventually decided his personal motto must be something like, why learn when you can inherit? Which I thought was pretty clever until Samira came up with trust fund baby makes good at being a trust fund baby and completely showed me up. The office chemistry changed the moment Liam planted his flag. It was like watching a nature documentary where an invasive species shows up and the local ecosystem has to figure out how to deal with this new predator that doesn't actually know how to hunt, but has somehow convinced everyone it's a lion. Liam's charm was a weapon, and entitlement was his ammunition. He'd walk into meetings late, armed with nothing but confidence and buzzwords, and somehow walk out having convinced half the room that his complete lack of preparation was actually thinking outside the box. He had this trick where he'd listen to you explain your project for maybe 30 seconds before interrupting with, but have we considered disrupting the paradigm? And everyone would nod like he'd just discovered fire. Disrupting what paradigm, Liam? The paradigm where people actually do work? The paradigm where showing up prepared is considered baseline professional behavior? Please, enlighten us. Samira and I started a betting pool in week 2 of Liam's reign. The bet? How long until a real deadline? Not a made-up, flexible, let's circle back kind of deadline, but an actual hard deadline with consequences would remove that smile from his face. I put my money on 3 months. Samira, ever the optimist about Schadenfreude, said 6 weeks. Maya refused to participate because, and I quote, gambling on human failure feels unprofessional. But then she whispered for weeks when she thought no one was listening. So even our moral compass was spinning on this one. Watching Liam operate was like watching someone play a video game they'd put on easy mode and then brag about their high score. He'd breeze into the office around 9:30, because apparently, the early bird catching the worm is for people who actually need to catch worms. With his overpriced coffee that cost more than my lunch budget for the week. He'd do this thing where he'd lean against people's cubicles, arms crossed, nodding thoughtfully while they explained complex problems, and then he'd drop some completely generic advice like, let's leverage our synergies on this, before walking away like he'd just solved world hunger. The teams under his leadership, and I'm using air quotes so hard right now they might achieve escape velocity, were in various states of bewildered frustration. Some were angry, some were resigned, and some had entered a zen-like state of acceptance that this was their life now, and maybe this was karma for something terrible they'd done in a past life. Nobody wanted to complain too loudly because, hey, that's the boss's son, and corporate self-preservation is a powerful motivator for keeping your mouth shut and your resume updated. But here's what really got me. What really made my eye twitch every time I saw Liam's perfectly gelled hair bobbing above the cubicle walls. Gregory was proud. Genuinely, embarrassingly, that's my boy proud. He'd introduce Liam to clients like he was showing off a prized racehorse, talking about his Stanford education and his fresh perspective and his innovative approach to leadership. Fresh perspective? The kid's perspective was so fresh it still had the price tag on it. Innovative leadership? He'd been here for 2 weeks and had yet to actually lead anyone anywhere except maybe to the conclusion that nepotism was alive and thriving at fast-track solutions. Rachel, to her credit, was mortified. She'd come home and rant about how Liam was making the family look bad, how he was coasting on the name, how he was going to crash and burn and take everyone down with him. He's never had to work for anything, she'd say, which was rich coming from someone who also grew up with the Holt last name. But at least Rachel had the self-awareness to recognize privilege when she saw it. Plus, she'd actually earned her spot at the company before we got married, working her way up through actual competence rather than genetic lottery. I'd listen to her vent while we ate whatever takeout had survived the commute home, and I'd make sympathetic noises while internally calculating how long I could watch this train wreck before I'd need to either intervene or just grab popcorn and enjoy the show. The problem with train wrecks involving your brother-in-law is that you're technically on the train too, even if you're just an innocent passenger who paid for his ticket with 6 years of hard work and overtime. Liam started showing up in my projects about 3 weeks in, not because he had anything valuable to contribute, but because Gregory thought it would be good for him to get exposure to enterprise-level work. Exposure. Like he was a plant that needed sunlight, except plants actually serve a purpose and don't spend half the meeting checking their phone. The really infuriating part, Liam wasn't completely stupid. He was smart enough to parrot back what he heard, smart enough to dress the part, smart enough to play the game at a surface level. He just had absolutely zero depth, no real understanding of how anything actually worked beyond the PowerPoint summary. He was like a really convincing hologram of a businessman. Looked great from a distance, but the moment you tried to interact with substance, your hand went right through and you realized there was nothing actually there. And that smile, that damn smile never wavered. Not through meetings where he clearly didn't understand the topic. Not through deadlines he missed because he was networking at some Stanford alumni brunch. Not through the increasingly desperate looks from the people actually doing the work while he took credit in front of Gregory. The smile stayed, perfect and infuriating, like it had been Botoxed into permanence. Little did I know, that smile was about to get tested in ways that Stanford definitely didn't prepare him for. Okay, so while Liam was busy being the human embodiment of a participation trophy, those of us who actually worked for a living were chasing something that mattered. I'm talking about Apex Corporation, and if you're wondering why I'm using italics in my internal monologue, it's because this deal deserved dramatic emphasis. Apex wasn't just another client. This was the client, the white whale, the golden ticket, the contract that would either launch Fast Track into the big leagues or confirm that we were destined to remain perpetually stuck in medium fish in medium pond territory. $50 million. That's not a typo. $50 million. Plus the kind of bragging rights that would let us strut into industry conferences like we own the place instead of sneaking in with the early bird discount badges. This was the deal that would put Fast Track on the map in bold, underlined, possibly even italicized font. Gregory had been courting Apex for over a year, doing that CEO dance where you pretend you're not desperate while also making it clear you'd sacrifice your firstborn for the opportunity. Well, maybe not his firstborn. Liam was still the golden child, but definitely someone's firstborn. Maybe an intern's. The moment Gregory confirmed we were in the running, he did what any reasonable CEO would do. He assembled the dream team. And by dream team, I mean he looked around, pointed at the people who actually knew what they were doing, and said, "You're on point for this." No pressure or anything, just the entire future of the company resting on our ability to not screw this up. You know, casual Tuesday stuff. There was Samira on marketing and client strategy, because if anyone could make our capabilities sound like we descended from Mount Olympus with solutions carved on stone tablets, it was her. The woman could sell ice to Eskimos, sand to Saudis, and enterprise software solutions to companies that probably didn't even need them, but would sign anyway, because her presentations were just that good. She had this gift for taking our extremely technical, borderline boring services and making them sound like the business equivalent of sliced bread, revolutionary, essential, and somehow sexy. Then we had Priya on UX design, who treated user interfaces like some people treat fine art. She'd spend hours agonizing over button placement and color schemes in a way that would make you think she was painting the Sistine Chapel instead of designing a dashboard. But here's the thing, she was always right. Every single time someone questioned her choices, the user testing would come back and prove that yes, actually, that shade of blue did matter, and yes, moving that button 3 pixels to the left did improve engagement by measurable amounts. Priya was the kind of perfectionist that made you want to strangle her and nominate her for awards in equal measure. Ben handled integration and technical architecture, which is a fancy way of saying he made sure all the complicated computer stuff talked to all the other complicated computer stuff without everything exploding into digital chaos. Ben was the guy who could look at a system diagram that resembled a plate of spaghetti drawn by a caffeinated toddler and somehow make sense of it. He spoke in acronyms I barely understood and got genuinely excited about database optimization, which should probably be a diagnostic criterion for something. But damn if he wasn't good at his job. And of course Maya. Maya guarded our network security like it was her houseplant. And yes, she actually had a plan on her desk that she watered with more regularity than I'd ever managed with mine. She treated every potential vulnerability like a personal insult and every security protocol like a sacred text. If you tried to bypass one of her security measures, she'd know about it before you even finished typing your password, and she'd appear behind you like some kind of IT ninja with a disappointed look that could wither your soul. This was my team. My people. The ones I'd trust to pull off something actually impressive instead of just impressive sounding, which is an important distinction in corporate America. We were the real deal, not the LinkedIn profile version of competent, but the actual, stay up until frame debugging code version of competent. I was the lead on the Apex pitch, which meant I got to experience the special joy of being responsible for everything while having control over nothing. It's like being a parent, except the baby is a multi-million-dollar contract, and instead of diapers you're dealing with stakeholder expectations and scope creep. Gregory made it very clear that this was my shot to prove I belonged in leadership, which was corporate speak for, don't screw this up, or we'll all pretend you were never really in consideration for promotion anyway. The preparation phase was basically my life for 3 months. I'm talking about the kind of deep dive that makes you forget what sunlight looks like and start having dreams in PowerPoint transitions. We pulled together everything: technical specs, case studies, ROI projections, implementation timelines, risk assessments, and enough backup documentation to fill a small library. We analyzed Apex's business model so thoroughly I could probably run their company better than their current CEO, which is a dangerous thing to think, but also probably true. The nights were long. I'm talking hunched over spreadsheets at midnight long. The kind of nights where you look up and realize it's 4 a.m. and you've been stress-eating granola bars for 6 hours while calculating percentage point improvements in efficiency metrics. We started talking in percentages more than in human words. How's it going? Someone would ask, and I'd respond with, we're at 93% on deliverables, but only 78% confident in the timeline assumptions. And nobody even blinked because that's just what we'd become. People who communicated in data points and pivot tables. My caffeine intake during this period could have funded a small startup. Seriously, if there was a way to convert coffee consumption into venture capital, I'd be a billionaire. I went from casual coffee drinker to someone who had opinions about bean origins and brewing temperatures, which is what happens when you spend enough time in the office that the break room becomes your primary social venue. The coffee at Fast Track was still terrible. Imagine hot water that's vaguely angry at you. But I drank it anyway because sleep was for people who weren't carrying the company's future on their shoulders. This project was our baby, except with fewer diapers and more slide decks. Though honestly, some of those early drafts were pretty crappy, so maybe the diaper comparison wasn't too far off. We nursed it, we fussed over it, we had heated debates about things like font choices that definitely didn't matter, but somehow felt life or death important at 2 in the morning. Samira and I once spent 45 minutes arguing about whether a particular graph should be a bar chart or a line chart, and we both made compelling cases that our therapists would probably have opinions about. The pitch deck itself was a work of art. I'm not exaggerating. This thing was beautiful. We had the data, we had the visuals, we had the narrative arc that took Apex from their current challenges to their future success with Fast Track as the hero of the story. It was compelling, it was comprehensive, and it was completely airtight. Every question we could anticipate had an answer. Every risk had a mitigation strategy. Every claim had supporting evidence. This wasn't just a pitch. This was a masterclass in enterprise sales. We did dry runs. So many dry runs. We pitched to each other. We pitched to other teams. We pitched to Gregory, who nitpicked everything with the enthusiasm of someone who really wanted us to succeed, but also enjoyed making us sweat. We adjusted, refined, polished, and perfected until the thing gleamed like a freshly waxed sports car. By the time we were done, I could have delivered that presentation in my sleep, which was good because I was basically doing everything in my sleep at that point anyway. The stakes were clear: land Apex, and Fast Track becomes a major player with resources to grow, hire, and actually compete with the big dogs. Lose Apex, and we'd be stuck in mediocrity, watching our competitors eat our lunch while we convinced ourselves that being a boutique firm was actually a choice and not just copium. This was make-or-break territory, and everyone knew it. Gregory was invested in a way that made it clear he saw this as his legacy play. This was the deal that would define his tenure as CEO, the thing people would remember when they talked about Fast Track's trajectory. Win this, and he was a visionary who built something lasting. Lose this, and he was just another small-time operator who couldn't break through to the next level. For me personally, this was everything. 6 years of grinding, of proving myself, of navigating the weird politics of being married to the boss's daughter while trying to earn respect on my own merits. It all came down to this: land Apex, and nobody could ever say I didn't deserve my seat at the table. Lose Apex, and I'd forever be the son-in-law who couldn't close the big one. So yeah, no pressure. Just my career, my reputation, my team's future, and my father-in-law's legacy all riding on whether I could convince a room full of executives that Fast Track Solutions was worth $50 million of their budget. Easy, right? The presentation was scheduled for 6 weeks out. We had our plan, we had our pitch, and we had our collective game faces on. What we didn't have, what none of us could have possibly anticipated, was a trust fund manchild with more audacity than sense, deciding that our hard work looked like an opportunity for him to play executive cosplay. But I'm getting ahead of myself again. For now, in this moment, we had hope. We had a solid plan. We had the best team possible. And we had absolutely no idea that someone was about to try to steal it all. It was 11:47 p.m. on a Wednesday, which I know because I'd been staring at the clock like it owed me money, watching the minutes tick by while I put the finishing touches on our Apex presentation. Rachel was already asleep, which was the smart move because normal humans with healthy boundaries don't polish PowerPoint slides at midnight on a Wednesday. But I wasn't normal. I was committed, caffeinated, and probably a little bit unhinged in that special way that only happens when you've invested 3 months of your life into something and you're so close to the finish line you can taste it. I was doing one final review of the executive summary, making sure every word was perfect, every comma was in its God-ordained place, when my phone buzzed on the desk next to me. Not a text buzz, not an email buzz. This was the specific, aggressive buzz that meant my security app was having feelings about something, and those feelings were urgent. The notification read, "Unauthorized access attempt. Your account has been accessed from an unrecognized device." My first thought, because I'm an optimist at heart despite all evidence suggesting I shouldn't be, was that this was a glitch. Maybe the system was having a moment. Maybe Mercury was in retrograde, or whatever excuse people use when technology decides to personally victimize them. But then my phone rang, and I saw Maya's name on the screen, and my stomach did that thing where it drops into your shoes, and then keeps going until it's somewhere in the basement. "Tell me this is a false alarm," I said, answering before the second ring finished. Because when Maya calls you at midnight, it's never to chat about her weekend plans or recommend a good Netflix show. I wish I could. Her voice had that particular quality of calm that bomb technicians probably use when they're defusing something explosive, measured, professional, and deeply concerning precisely because it's so controlled. "Someone accessed your account 17 minutes ago from a device registered to the executive floor. Conference room B, to be specific. Conference room B." Let me paint you a picture of where Conference room B is located, because geography matters in this little corporate crime drama. It's nestled conveniently on the executive floor, right in that sweet spot between Gregory's corner office and the smaller office that Liam had claimed as his territory despite having been at the company for all of 5 minutes. You know, just a coincidence. Nothing suspicious about that location at all. Conference room B, I repeated, because sometimes when your brain is processing a betrayal, it needs to say things out loud to make them feel real. At 11:30 at night. On a Wednesday. 11:32. Technically, Maya corrected, because she's constitutionally incapable of letting inaccurate timestamps slide. And before you ask, yes, I've already pulled the access logs. The door was opened using an executive keycard at 11:27 p.m. Building security shows one person entering and remaining in the room. I wanted to make a joke. My brain, in its infinite wisdom and pathological need to cope with stress through humor, immediately went to something like, maybe Liam finally figured out how to log into civilization and deserves a participation trophy. But the laugh died somewhere in my throat because this wasn't funny. This was the opposite of funny. This was my life's work potentially being compromised by someone who probably still had their mom do their laundry. What did they access? I asked, even though I already knew the answer was going to make me want to put my fist through my laptop screen. Maya's pause was brief but significant. Everything relating to Apex. All the presentation files, the financial models, the technical specifications, the implementation timeline. They also accessed your performance review folder. They what? Your performance reviews from the past 3 years. And some HR documentation. Personnel files. Salary information for your team members. She rattled off the list like she was reading a grocery list. Except instead of milk and eggs, it was every piece of sensitive information that could be weaponized by someone with enough audacity and not enough brain cells. They downloaded everything to a USB drive. Took about 12 minutes total. 12 minutes. This person, and let's be real, we both knew exactly who this person was, had spent 12 minutes rifling through my digital life like a burglar going through someone's underwear drawer. 12 minutes to download months of work, years of performance documentation, and probably enough information to either claim credit for everything or tank the entire presentation, depending on which direction their incompetence decided to flow. The timestamp thing was really bothering me, so I pulled up my own access logs while Maya stayed on the line. There it was, clear as day. My account, accessed from conference room B, downloading files at a rate that suggested someone who knew exactly what they were looking for or was just grabbing everything that looked important and hoping for the best. Given who we were dealing with, I was betting on the latter. Are there security cameras in that conference room? I asked, already knowing the answer but hoping the universe would surprise me. No. Privacy concerns. Executive floor conference rooms don't have internal cameras. Only hallway coverage. Of course they didn't. Because why would we make this easy? Why would we live in a world where corporate malfeasance was easily documented and prosecuted? That would be too convenient. My mind was racing, doing that thing where it tries to process information faster than it actually can and just ends up spinning like a computer with too many tabs open. The Apex presentation was in 6 weeks. 6 weeks until the biggest pitch of my career, of fast-track's trajectory, of everything I'd been working toward. And now someone, fine, Liam, it was obviously Liam, had a copy of everything. What are the chances this was a legitimate mistake? I asked, because apparently I was still clinging to the possibility that we lived in a universe where things made sense and people didn't actively sabotage their own family members' careers. Oliver. Maya's voice had that tone that teachers use when they're disappointed in you for even asking a stupid question. Your account was accessed from an executive floor conference room at almost midnight using credentials that would have required your password, which I know you didn't give to anyone because you're paranoid about security. Rightfully so, apparently. The person systematically downloaded every file related to your biggest project plus sensitive personnel information. This wasn't someone accidentally clicking the wrong folder. She was right. Of course she was right. Maya was always right about security stuff, which was why she was so good at her job, and also why she was probably going to have an aneurysm from constantly watching people do stupid things with technology. I felt that specific flavor of anger that comes from being betrayed by someone you never trusted in the first place, which is a weird kind of emotion. It's like you already knew this person was capable of this kind of thing, but you're still somehow surprised and offended that they actually did it. Liam had been at Fast Track for barely 2 months, had contributed exactly nothing of value except his last name and a collection of buzzwords, and now he was stealing work that my team had bled for. Can you track what he does with the files? I asked, because if I was going to be robbed, I at least wanted to watch the robbery in progress. Already on it. I flagged everything he downloaded with monitoring protocols. If he opens any of those files, modifies them, or transfers them anywhere, I'll know. I'm also logging every keystroke in his account from here on out. Maya paused, and I could hear her typing in the background, that rapid-fire keyboard action that meant she was already 3 steps ahead of me. But Oliver, you need to think about what you want to do here. This is the CEO's son. This is your brother-in-law. This is, this is theft, I interrupted, because we needed to call it what it was. This is corporate espionage from inside the building, which is somehow even more insulting than if it came from outside. The stomach drop I'd experienced earlier had evolved into full-body rage mixed with that special kind of panic that comes from realizing someone might torpedo something you care about. My first instinct was to drive to the office right then, march up to wherever Liam was presumably sleeping off his crime spree, and have what my therapist would probably call an inappropriate confrontation. My second instinct was slightly more measured, but only barely. We need documentation, I said, shifting into problem-solving mode because that's what I did when things went sideways. I made plans. Everything. Timestamps, access logs, download records, the works. And we need to figure out what he's planning to do with this information. Already compiling it, Maya confirmed. I'm also checking to see if this is the first time he's accessed your account or if there have been other instances we missed. Other instances. The thought made me want to throw my laptop out the window, but considering I was on the third floor and that laptop contained the only clean copy of the Apex presentation, that seemed counterproductive. How long had this been going on? Had Liam been sneaking around in my accounts for weeks, watching my work, waiting for the perfect moment to strike? Or was this a crime of opportunity, a midnight brainstorm where he decided that stealing was easier than actual work? I checked the other timestamps Maya had sent over. The download had finished at 11:44 p.m. Liam, because let's stop pretending it could be anyone else, had spent 12 minutes grabbing my life's work and then presumably waltzed out of there like he'd just had a productive late-night strategy session with himself. He's going to use this, I said, the realization settling over me like cold water. He's going to take the Apex presentation and try to present it himself. He's going to walk into Gregory's office with my work and claim it as his own contribution. Probably, Maya agreed, because she wasn't the type to sugarcoat reality when reality tasted bitter enough already. Question is, what are you going to do about it? What was I going to do about it? That was the multi-million-dollar question, wasn't it? I could go to Gregory right now, present the evidence, and watch it turn into a family drama that would make Thanksgiving dinner awkward for the next decade. I could confront Liam directly and give him a chance to return everything and pretend this never happened, though that seemed unlikely given his track record of accountability. Or I could do something else, something smarter, something that would teach little Prince Liam exactly what happens when you steal from people who actually know what they're doing. The plan started forming in my head like mold on forgotten leftovers. Ugly, opportunistic, and potentially very effective. It was petty. It was risky. It was probably going to blow up in my face in ways I couldn't fully anticipate. It was perfect. Maya, I said slowly, an idea crystallizing in my caffeine-addled brain. How hard would it be to create a honeypot? There's a special kind of satisfaction that comes from planning revenge, especially when that revenge is technically legal and professionally justifiable. I'm not talking about the movie kind of revenge where someone's car mysteriously explodes or their house gets toilet papered by coordinated teenagers. I'm talking about the sophisticated white collar. I'm going to use your own stupidity against you, kind of revenge that makes HR nervous but can't quite figure out how to stop. Maya and I spent the next 3 hours, yes, 3 hours at midnight on a Wednesday, because apparently neither of us had healthy boundaries or functioning melatonin production, building the most beautiful trap corporate America has ever seen. A honeypot, for those not versed in cybersecurity lingo, is basically a decoy system designed to attract and detect unauthorized access. In this case, we were building a fake version of the Apex presentation that looked absolutely delicious on the surface, but would be catastrophically useless in actual practice. We needed to look legitimate, Maya said, her fingers flying across her keyboard with the intensity of a concert pianist who'd had way too much coffee. If it looks obviously fake, he won't take the bait. It needs to be just polished enough that he thinks he's struck gold, but just wrong enough that when he presents it, he'll crash and burn spectacularly. I added, because I wasn't just looking for justice here. I was looking for poetic justice, which is justice's better dressed, more dramatic cousin. We started with the financial projections. The real numbers were solid, conservative, and backed by months of research and market analysis. The honeypot numbers? Oh, those were special. We kept them just plausible enough that someone who didn't actually understand finance, say, someone with a Stanford degree who'd never actually worked a real job, would think they made sense. ROI figures so optimistic they could star in a motivational poster. Cost savings that would make a CFO laugh and then cry. Revenue projections that assumed exponential growth without any of that pesky thing called market reality. This timeline, I said, pointing at the implementation schedule we were fabricating, needs to be aggressive but not completely insane. How about we promise full deployment in 3 months? Maya suggested with a grin that could only be described as evil genius meets exhausted IT professional. 3 months? Maya, that's... I paused, thinking about it. The real timeline was 18 months, carefully planned with buffer time for the inevitable disasters that plague every enterprise implementation. 3 months was laughable. It was impossible. It was perfect. 3 months is genius. Add a note that says we're leveraging agile methodologies and utilizing cutting-edge DevOps practices. Buzzword bingo. I like it. She typed rapidly, adding phrases that sounded impressive but meant absolutely nothing. What about the technical specifications? This was where we got creative. The real tech specs were boring because they were accurate. Proper server configurations, realistic data migration timelines, actual security protocols that would keep Apex's information safe. The honeypot specs? We went wild. We promised integration with systems that would require technology that didn't quite exist yet. We casually mentioned scalability that would need server farms the size of small countries. We threw in references to blockchain and AI because of course we did. Nothing says, I don't know what I'm talking about, quite like unnecessarily mentioning blockchain. Should we add something about quantum computing? I asked, only half joking. Maya looked at me like I'd just suggested we promise Apex a unicorn-powered database. Don't push it. We want him to look incompetent, not completely unhinged. Fair point. We scaled back the quantum computing, but kept the bit about machine learning algorithms that would revolutionize their data analytics paradigm. Whatever that meant. The beautiful thing about corporate buzzwords is that they sound important enough that people nod along even when they mean absolutely nothing. The presentation itself needed to look good. This was crucial. Liam had to believe he'd stolen something valuable, which meant the visual design had to match our usual quality. Maya and I spent an embarrassing amount of time making sure the fonts matched, the color scheme was consistent, and the graphics looked professional. We were essentially creating a Trojan horse, except instead of Greek soldiers, it was filled with career-ending incompetence. Around 2:30 in the morning, I realized we needed legal cover for this whole operation. Not because what we were doing was illegal. It wasn't, technically, since we were just creating misleading internal documents in response to theft, but because I wanted someone with a law degree to tell me I wasn't about to accidentally commit a crime in my quest for justice. I called Eli Torres, our corporate counsel, and the only lawyer I knew who might answer his phone at 2:30 a.m. without immediately hanging up. Eli was one of those rare breeds who actually understood both law and technology, which made him invaluable and also perpetually exhausted from explaining basic legal concepts to people who thought terms of service was just a suggestion. This better be good. Eli answered on the 4th ring, his voice thick with sleep and what I assumed was regret about his career choices. How do you feel about honeypot operations in response to internal data theft? I asked, because there's no point in easing into these conversations. There was a long pause. I could practically hear Eli's brain booting up, processing my question, and deciding whether he wanted to engage with this madness or just hang up and pretend I'd never called. Tell me everything, he finally said, and leave nothing out, because I need to know exactly how much trouble you're about to get us all into. I explained the situation, Liam's midnight theft, the downloaded files, our plan to create a decoy presentation that would expose his incompetence if he tried to use it. Eli listened with the occasional grunt that could have meant either approval or the sound of him drafting his resignation letter in his head. Legally, Eli said when I finished, you're in the clear as long as you document everything. The unauthorized access, the theft, your response. Keep logs of everything. Timestamps, access records, the works. If this goes sideways, you need to be able to prove that you were responding to legitimate security concerns and not just setting up an elaborate prank. So document everything like I'm writing a thesis on corporate sabotage, I summarized. Exactly. Make it so detailed that if this ends up in arbitration, and Oliver, there's a non-zero chance this ends up in arbitration, You can present a timeline that shows clear cause and effect. He stole your work. You created a security measure. He chose to use stolen materials. He suffered the consequences of his own actions. Beautiful, I said, because when a lawyer tells you something is legally defensible, it's like getting a permission slip from the universe to proceed with your morally questionable but technically justified plan. Also, Eli added, maybe run this by Rachel before you implement it? Just a thought, since it involves her brother and all. Rachel, right, my wife, who was currently sleeping peacefully in our bed while I plotted the professional downfall of her younger sibling. That was going to be a fun conversation. I'll handle Rachel, I said with more confidence than I felt. Famous last words, Eli muttered. Document everything. Don't do anything that could be construed as entrapment. And for the love of God, keep me in the loop. I don't want to find out about this from Gregory when he's threatening to sue someone. I promised to keep him updated and hung up, then looked at Maya, who'd been listening to my side of the conversation while simultaneously coding our elaborate trap. We're good, legally speaking. Excellent. Because I just finished the decoy files. She turned her monitor toward me, and I had to admire the work. It looked perfect, professional, polished. Completely, utterly wrong in ways that wouldn't be obvious until someone who actually knew what they were talking about started asking questions. We uploaded everything to my account, making sure it was prominently placed in folders that would look important and valuable. Then Maya worked her magic, setting up monitoring on everything. If Liam so much as breathed near these files, we'd know about it. Every access, every download, every copy-paste operation would be logged with the kind of detail that would make forensic accountants jealous. Now what? Maya asked, stifling a yawn that reminded me that normal humans needed sleep. Now we wait, I said, feeling that special mix of anticipation and dread that comes from setting a trap and hoping the prey is dumb enough to walk into it. We wait and see if our little prince is greedy enough to steal twice. I tried to make light of the whole situation, throwing out a joke about how if Liam wanted to play God, we'd let him play with cosplay theology, all the robes and ceremonies, but none of the actual power. Maya rolled her eyes in that way that suggested she was both amused and concerned about my mental state, which was fair given that it was now 3 a.m. and I was making elaborate metaphors about divine impersonation. The trap was set. The bait was irresistible. The monitoring was comprehensive enough to track a paranoid spy's movements. All we needed now was for Liam to do what Liams do best, take something that wasn't his and assume he deserved it anyway. I finally crawled into bed around 3:30, my brain buzzing with caffeine and schadenfreude. Rachel stirred slightly, mumbled something about me working too late, and went back to sleep. I lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, feeling like a mischievous schoolboy who'd just learned how to edit the teacher's slideshow and was waiting for class to start. Somewhere in the fast-track offices, a USB drive containing my stolen work sat in Liam's desk drawer or briefcase or wherever entitled people keep their ill-gotten gains. And somewhere in my account, a beautiful, polished, completely catastrophic decoy presentation waited like a loaded mousetrap. The only question now was whether the mouse was hungry enough to come back for seconds. Spoiler alert, he was. I didn't have to wait long. In fact, I didn't even make it through my morning coffee, the first good cup I'd had in days, from the fancy place down the street that charged $7 for what was essentially hot bean water with delusions of grandeur, before my phone lit up with a text from Maya that consisted of 3 words and an emoji. Fish took bait fishing pole. It was 9:47 in the morning, barely 12 hours after we'd set the trap, and Liam had already taken a second helping of stolen goods. The sheer audacity was almost impressive. Almost. It was like watching someone rob a bank, get away with it, and then come back the next day because they forgot to steal the pens from the counter. Except instead of pens, it was my carefully crafted professional destruction disguised as a career opportunity. I was sitting at my desk trying to look like a person who hadn't spent half the night building an elaborate corporate mousetrap when Maya appeared beside me like a security-conscious ninja. She didn't say anything, just tilted her laptop screen toward me so I could see the access logs. There it was, clear as day. My account, accessed at 9:32 a.m. from, you guessed it, Conference Room B on the executive floor. Same location, same MO, except this time Liam had the confidence of someone who'd already gotten away with it once. He downloaded everything in the Apex Final Presentation folder, Maya said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper even though we were in my office with the door closed. Took him about 8 minutes. He was less careful this time, probably because he thinks he's in the clear. What's he doing now? I asked, pulling up my own monitoring dashboard because watching a train wreck in real time is somehow more satisfying when you're the one who laid the tracks. Based on his account activity, he's reviewing the files. Opened the main presentation deck about 3 minutes ago. Maya's expression was the human equivalent of that cat who ate the canary look, except the cat was a cybersecurity professional and the canary was a trust fund baby who was about to learn what consequences taste like. The rest of the morning was torture in the best possible way. Liam was somewhere in the building, presumably feeling very pleased with himself, reviewing materials he'd stolen while thinking he'd pulled off some kind of corporate heist. Meanwhile, I was at my desk doing actual work on the real Apex presentation, which we'd encrypted and stored in a location that would require both Maya's password and a blood sacrifice to access. Around 11, Samira stopped by my office with that look on her face, the one that meant she had gossip hot enough to melt steel beams. "You're not going to believe what I just saw," she said, closing the door behind her and settling into the chair across from my desk like someone about to deliver the performance of a lifetime. "Try me," I said, because at this point my belief in human audacity had expanded to include pretty much anything. Liam just walked past the break room with the biggest, smuggest smile I've ever seen on a human face. And I once watched a guy parallel park perfectly on his first try and then give himself a standing ovation. So that's saying something. Samira leaned forward conspiratorially. He was humming. Humming, Oliver. Like someone who thinks they just won the lottery. What was he humming? I asked, because somehow the details mattered in documenting this spectacular display of unearned confidence. I don't know, but it had main character energy. She paused, studying my face with the intensity of someone who knew me well enough to know when I was hiding something. "Why do you look like the cat who ate the canary?" "Do I?" I tried for innocent, but probably landed somewhere around guilty as charged. "You absolutely do. Spill." I glanced at Maya, who gave me the slightest nod. Samira was trustworthy, and honestly, she deserved to know what was coming after putting up with Liam's nonsense for the past 2 months. I gave her the abbreviated version, the midnight theft, the honeypot, the fact that Liam had just downloaded what he thought was the latest version of our Apex presentation, but was actually a career-ending disaster wrapped in professional formatting. Samira's eyes got progressively wider as I talked, and by the end she was grinning like someone who'd just been told Christmas was coming early and bringing revenge as a stocking stuffer. "You're evil," she said with genuine admiration. "Like, diabolical. I love it. When does he present?" "That's the thing. We don't know if he's actually going to present it or just use it for research." I made air quotes that could probably be seen from space. "But based on his behavior this morning." "Oh, he's going to present it," Samira said with absolute certainty. "Trust me. I've watched that boy operate for 2 months now. He thinks he's God's gift to enterprise solutions. There's no way he downloaded all that material just to look at it. He's going to walk into Gregory's office, probably sometime today, and position himself as having insights or strategic additions to the Apex pitch." She was right, of course. Samira had this uncanny ability to read people, which made her both an excellent teammate and someone you definitely didn't want to play poker against. We spent the next few minutes speculating about exactly how Liam would position his theft. Would he claim he'd collaborated on the materials? Would he suggest he'd enhanced the existing work? Would he just straight up try to take credit for the whole thing? "My money's on him claiming he did a comprehensive review and found areas for improvement," Samira said. "It gives him credit without explicitly claiming he did the original work, but it positions him as the smart one who saw what everyone else missed." "Areas for improvement," I repeated, tasting the irony. "In a presentation that's specifically designed to fall apart under scrutiny." "Beautiful," Samira said. "It's like watching someone confidently walk toward a rake they're about to step on. Except the rake is their own incompetence, and you placed it there with surgical precision." Around 2 in the afternoon, the office grapevine, which operated with more efficiency than our actual IT systems, delivered news that made my day. Liam had been spotted going into Gregory's office with a leather portfolio that probably cost more than my monthly car payment, looking like someone about to present a groundbreaking discovery. According to Marcus from accounting, who'd been walking past at exactly the right moment, Liam had knocked on Gregory's door with the kind of confidence that suggested he was either about to propose marriage or propose something equally life-changing. He's doing it, Maya confirmed via text, because apparently she'd tapped into the security camera feeds like the professional overachiever she was. Conference with Gregory started at 2:04 p.m. Can't see what they're discussing, but body language suggests Liam is in presentation mode. I tried to focus on actual work, reviewing vendor contracts, responding to emails, pretending I was a functional professional and not someone whose entire mental bandwidth was occupied by schadenfreude. But it was impossible. Somewhere in this building, Liam was probably showing Gregory the honeypot presentation, pointing out all the impressive features, highlighting the aggressive but achievable timeline, and generally digging his own grave with a shovel made of stolen data and unfounded confidence. The afternoon crawled by with the speed of a DMV line. Every time my phone buzzed, I jumped, expecting news. Every time someone walked past my office, I wondered if they were coming to tell me that Gregory had called an emergency meeting or that Liam had been promoted to Supreme Commander of all things, or that the universe had decided to reward theft and punish honesty, because that's apparently how things work now. At 4:30, my phone finally rang. Gregory's name on the caller ID. My heart did that thing where it tries to escape through your throat while simultaneously dropping into your stomach, which is anatomically impossible but emotionally accurate. Oliver, can you come to my office? Gregory's voice was neutral, professional, giving away nothing. I'd like to discuss the Apex presentation. Of course, I said, managing to sound calm despite the fact that my internal monologue was screaming. I'll be right there. I stood up, straightened my tie, and took a deep breath. Maya appeared in my doorway like she'd been summoned by telepathy. He knows something, I said. Good, Maya replied. Let him know everything. The walk to Gregory's office felt simultaneously too long and too short, like Schrodinger's hallway. I passed Samira's desk, and she gave me a thumbs up that was probably meant to be encouraging, but mostly made me more nervous. I passed the break room where someone had made popcorn, which felt inappropriately festive given that I was potentially walking toward either vindication or unemployment. When I reached Gregory's office, the door was slightly ajar. I could see Liam inside, sitting in one of the chairs across from Gregory's desk, still wearing that smile. That damn smile that made me want to either punch something or laugh hysterically. I couldn't decide which. I knocked. Gregory called me in, and as I entered the room, I caught Liam's expression shift for just a moment. A flash of something that might have been concern or might have been indigestion, hard to tell. Gregory gestured to the empty chair next to Liam, and I sat down, maintaining the kind of professional composure that definitely didn't match my internal state of barely contained anticipation. Oliver, Gregory began, and I noticed he had papers spread across his desk, printouts of something, though I couldn't see exactly what from my angle. Liam came to me this afternoon with some interesting materials related to the Apex presentation. He suggested there might be some areas where we could strengthen our approach. Really? I said, not quite making it a question, looking at Liam with what I hoped was polite interest and not the predatory glee I was actually feeling. Liam's smile got brighter, which I hadn't thought was physically possible. I've been doing some independent research, he said, which was such an incredible euphemism for theft that I almost had to admire it. I think I've identified some opportunities to make our pitch even more competitive. Opportunities, I repeated, committing his words to memory for later. That's great, Liam. Really great initiative. And that's when I saw it. The slight flicker in Liam's eyes that suggested maybe, just maybe, he was starting to realize that this conversation wasn't going exactly where he'd expected it to go. But by then, it was too late. The fish had swallowed the hook, and now all that was left was reeling him in. The morning of the Apex presentation arrived with the kind of beautiful weather that felt personally offensive given the emotional chaos I was experiencing. Sunny, 72 degrees, light breeze. The universe was basically mocking me with perfect conditions for what was about to be either my greatest professional triumph or a family-destroying disaster that would make Thanksgiving dinner awkward until the heat death of the sun. I got to the office at 6:30 a.m., which was early even by my anxious overachiever standards. The building was mostly empty except for the cleaning crew and Gerald from IT, who apparently just lived there now. I went to the executive conference room where the presentation would happen and did what any reasonable person would do. I checked that all the AV equipment worked, I made sure my backup files were accessible, and I positioned myself mentally for what was essentially going to be corporate gladiatorial combat, except with more PowerPoint and fewer lions. The room itself was peak executive intimidation. Massive table made from what was probably an endangered tree species, leather chairs that cost more than my first car, and windows that overlooked the city in a way that said, "We're important enough to have a view." It smelled like money, coffee, and the lingering fear of every middle manager who'd ever been called in here for a performance review. By 8 a.m., the team started arriving. Samira showed up with that look people get when they know drama is coming, and they've already mentally prepared their popcorn. Ben was nervous in that quiet way engineers get when they have to interact with executives who don't understand what APIs are. Priya looked polished and professional, though I caught her doing those deep breathing exercises that suggested she was either very zen or very stressed. Maya appeared last, gave me a nod that communicated volumes, and took her position near the laptop that would be running the presentation. At 8:15, Apex Corporation's executive team walked in, and suddenly the room's energy shifted from nervous anticipation to professional showtime. Catherine Wilson, Apex's CEO, led the pack, late 50s, power suit that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage, and the kind of handshake that evaluated your net worth while simultaneously checking if you had a spine. She was sharp in the way that apex predators are sharp, which seemed fitting given her company's name. Behind her was Omar Al-Rahman, their CTO, who had the look of someone who'd seen every tech pitch in existence and had been disappointed by approximately 98% of them. And then there was Sarah Chun, their CFO, carrying what I assumed was a financial analysis that would either validate our projections or destroy them with the precision of a surgical laser. They were hungry, professional, and allergic to anything that remotely resembled fluff or incompetence. In other words, they were exactly the kind of clients you wanted if your presentation was solid, and exactly the kind of clients you feared if your presentation was held together with buzzwords and wishful thinking. Gregory entered last, doing that CEO walk that somehow managed to own a room he technically already owned. He was beam proud in that way fathers get when they think their children are about to do something impressive. Except the child he was looking at wasn't me. It was Liam, who strolled in behind Gregory wearing a suit so immaculate, it looked like it had been assembled by a team of Italian tailors working in a hermetically sealed clean room. And there it was, the moment I'd been simultaneously dreading and anticipating. Gregory positioned himself at the head of the table, did the obligatory welcomes and introductions, and then said the words that made my stomach do gymnastics. "I'd like to introduce Liam Holt, who'll be leading today's presentation. Liam has been instrumental in developing our strategic approach for this partnership." Instrumental. That was the word he used. Instrumental, like Liam had been some kind of key component in a process he'd actually just stolen from. The audacity was breathtaking, really. I had front row seats to this disaster. Literally, I was sitting right there at the table, because of course I had to be present. Gregory had insisted that the full team be there, which in practice meant I got to watch my brother-in-law potentially immolate his career using materials I'd specifically designed for exactly that purpose. Liam opened his portfolio with the kind of dramatic flair usually reserved for magic shows or wedding proposals. He smiled at the Apex executives like they were already his best friends, and they just didn't know it yet. "Thank you all for being here," he began, his voice smooth as expensive whiskey and just as likely to lead to poor decisions. "I'm excited to share our vision for how fast-track solutions can transform Apex Corporation's enterprise infrastructure." The confidence was contagious, I'll give him that. He had that Stanford-educated, trust fund-enabled certainty that comes from never having truly failed at anything important. He worked the room like he'd been born in it, making eye contact, using people's names, doing that thing where he paused for effect like he was delivering TED Talk wisdom instead of a sales pitch built on stolen materials and catastrophically bad assumptions. The first few slides were fine because they were mostly introductory fluff, company background, team credentials, general market analysis. This was the stuff we'd actually left accurate in the honeypot, because you can't really mess up who we are without it being obviously fake. Liam delivered it smoothly, hitting all the beats, sounding like someone who might actually know what he was talking about if you weren't paying close attention. Catherine Wilson was paying close attention. I could see it in the way she watched Liam. Her expression neutral, but her eyes tracking every word, every gesture, cataloging information with the efficiency of someone who hadn't become a CEO by accepting things at face value. Omar was taking notes on his tablet, occasionally glancing up with an expression that suggested he was either impressed or reserving judgment until actual technical details appeared. Sarah had her financial documents spread in front of her like tarot cards that predicted fiscal disaster or success. Then Liam got to the technical implementation timeline, and I felt that special thrill you get when watching a roller coaster crest the first big hill. You know what's coming, you've anticipated this moment, and there's no stopping it now. We're proposing a 3-month implementation timeline, Liam said with the confidence of someone who had absolutely no idea that 3 months was functionally impossible for a project of this scope. Omar's eyebrows went up slightly. It was subtle, but I caught it. The first crack in the professional facade. The first signal that something wasn't adding up. 3 months for full deployment? He asked, his tone carefully neutral. That's correct, Liam confirmed, probably thinking he was impressing them with ambition rather than revealing his complete ignorance of how enterprise systems actually worked. We'll be leveraging agile methodologies and utilizing cutting-edge DevOps practices to accelerate the timeline. Leveraging agile methodologies. I almost bit through my tongue, trying not to laugh. Those were the exact words I'd put in the honeypot, the corporate buzzwords that sounded impressive but meant nothing when you actually tried to apply them to a project this complex. It was like promising to build a skyscraper in a week because you had really good hammers and an optimistic attitude. Catherine leaned forward slightly. Walk me through the phases of that timeline. How are you planning to compress what typically takes 12 to 18 months into 3? And there it was, the first real question, the kind that required actual knowledge rather than confident projection. I watched Liam's face, saw the micro-expression that flickered across it. Not quite panic, but definitely the realization that he was now in water deeper than he'd anticipated. To his credit, he tried to recover, launching into an explanation about parallel work streams and optimized resource allocation, terms he'd probably pulled from the honeypot presentation without understanding what they actually meant in practice. Omar interrupted with a technical question about data migration protocols. Liam's answer was word salad, technically accurate terms arranged in an order that made no actual sense, like someone had put industry jargon in a blender and poured out the result. I could see Omar's expression shift from interested to skeptical, that look technical people get when they realize someone is BS-gingy them with their own vocabulary. Then came the financial projections, and this is where things got truly beautiful in that car crash kind of way. Liam presented the ROI numbers we'd deliberately inflated. Cost savings that would require either magic or massive fraud to achieve. Revenue projections that assumed Apex would somehow triple their operational efficiency overnight, and implementation costs that were criminally underestimated. Sarah Chun didn't even try to hide her reaction. She looked down at her own financial analysis, looked back up at the projection on the screen, and her expression went from professional interest to what I can only describe as politely restrained horror. These cost projections, she said slowly, like someone trying very hard not to call bullshit in a professional setting, are significantly lower than industry standards for implementations of this scale. Can you break down how you arrived at these numbers? Liam opened his mouth, and what came out was verbal duct tape, an attempt to patch together an answer from fragments of financial terminology that he clearly didn't understand. He mentioned economies of scale and strategic vendor partnerships and innovative cost structures, which were all real phrases that meant things, just not in the context he was using them in. Creative fiction, Sarah said finally, and the temperature in the room dropped about 15 degrees. That's what I'd call this cost model. Creative fiction. Gregory's expression had gone from being proud to increasingly concerned, the look of a father watching his son confidently walk off a cliff while narrating the journey. Catherine Wilson had leaned back in her chair, arms crossed, and I recognized that posture. It was the universal body language for, I'm watching a disaster and taking mental notes for later. The questions kept coming, faster and sharper, each one exposing another layer of Liam's fundamental lack of understanding. The technical specifications that promised things current technology couldn't deliver. The security protocols that violated basic industry standards. The integration timeline that would require a time machine or a miracle. Every answer Liam gave just dug the hole deeper, and I could see him starting to sweat despite the room's aggressive air conditioning. It was like watching a circus act where the clown had borrowed someone else's PhD and was now trying to defend a dissertation on quantum physics using only confidence and hand gestures. Magnificent. Terrible. Magnificently terrible. And then Gregory did something I hadn't anticipated. He stood up, put a hand on Liam's shoulder, and said, "Let's take a 15-minute break." His voice was calm, but his face told a different story, the kind of expression that suggested the hallway conversation they were about to have would be the opposite of pleasant. The hallway conversation lasted exactly 12 minutes. I know because I watched the clock like it was counting down to either my execution or my vindication, still couldn't tell which. Through the conference room's glass walls, I could see Gregory and Liam in what corporate America calls a crucial conversation, and normal people call getting absolutely reamed in semi-public. When they came back, Liam's smile had downgraded from toothpaste commercial to hostage video, and Gregory looked like someone who'd just discovered his prize racehorse was actually 3 kids in a costume. The Apex executives watched this return with the detached interest of people who'd seen enough corporate drama to recognize a dumpster fire when it was actively burning in front of them. "Let's continue," Gregory said, his voice carrying that special tone of controlled disappointment that only fathers and CEOs can truly master. He gestured for Liam to proceed, and I realized we were watching a professional execution in slow motion. Catherine Wilson didn't waste time. "Let's talk about your ROI assumptions again," she said, and it wasn't really a request. Omar jumped in immediately after with questions about the technical architecture, and this time he wasn't being polite about it. He was actively dismantling Liam's explanations like a mechanic taking apart a car engine made of cardboard and wishful thinking. Liam's answers devolved into pure corporate jargon confetti. He was throwing out buzzwords like they were life preservers, hoping something would stick. Synergistic integration, he said. Paradigm-shifting methodologies. Disruptive optimization frameworks. It was word soup, and everyone in the room knew they were being served nonsense with a garnish of incompetence. Sarah Chun, bless her CFO heart, went for the killing blow. "This cost model," she said, tapping her pen on the printed financials in front of her, would require either a fundamental misunderstanding of enterprise implementation costs or a deliberate attempt to mislead us about project scope. Which is it? The silence that followed was the kind you could carve with a knife and serve at uncomfortable family dinners. Gregory stood up, and the movement had the finality of a judge's gavel. "I apologize for this," he said to Catherine, and the words looked like they physically hurt him to say. "There's clearly been some confusion about the presentation materials. Oliver, you were the actual lead on this project. Can you clarify?" Finally, my moment. I stood up with what I hoped looked like professional calm and not the giddy anticipation of someone who'd been waiting for exactly this opening. "Of course," I said, pulling out my tablet. "Catherine, Omar, Sarah, I apologize for the confusion. What Liam presented wasn't the actual Apex proposal. It was, let's call it, unauthorized materials." Liam's face went from stress to panic faster than a stock market crash. I was just. "Let me be specific," I continued, and honestly, I was channeling every courtroom drama I'd ever watched. 6 days ago, my account was accessed without authorization from conference room B on the executive floor. Multiple files were downloaded, including preliminary materials that were never meant for client presentation. I nodded to Maya, who pulled up her laptop with the kind of efficiency that suggested she'd been waiting for this moment too. "We have logs," Maya said, her voice calm and professional as she connected to the main display. "Timestamps, device fingerprints, access records." On the screen, everyone could see the evidence, dates, times, locations, all pointing to unauthorized access from the executive floor. We also implemented security monitoring on those files. Every time they were accessed or modified, we tracked it. Liam tried to speak, started to say something about this being a setup, but Gregory held up a hand that said, "Stop talking before you make this worse," which was probably the best parenting advice he'd given in months. Catherine Wilson's expression shifted from annoyed to intrigued. So what you're telling me is that what we just sat through was essentially a honeypot operation. Essentially, yes, I confirmed. The real presentation is significantly different and actually achievable. The real presentation took 45 minutes, and let me tell you, after watching Liam's spectacular implosion, delivering actual competent information felt like showing up to a knife fight with a functioning brain. Catherine Wilson and her team leaned in, asked intelligent questions that had real answers, and slowly transformed from annoyed executives who'd just wasted their morning into engaged clients who were starting to see the actual value proposition. I walked them through the realistic 18-month timeline, explaining each phase with the kind of detail that comes from actually understanding what you're talking about rather than just reading words off slides you stole. Omar asked technical questions about data migration and integration protocols, and I answered them with specifics, actual server configurations, real security measures, honest assessments of potential challenges, and how we'd address them. Sarah Chun reviewed our financial projections with what I can only describe as relief, nodding along as the numbers actually made sense for the first time that morning. This, Catherine said when I finished, gesturing at the screen, is what I expected when we agreed to this meeting. Realistic, comprehensive, and clearly the work of people who actually know what they're doing. She glanced at Liam, who'd spent my entire presentation looking like he wished the floor would open up and swallow him into whatever dimension failed trust fund babies go to contemplate their life choices. Unlike whatever that was earlier, Gregory cleared his throat, and I recognized that sound. It was the CEO equivalent of a fighter acknowledging they'd taken a hit and needed to regroup. "I owe you all an apology," he said, looking directly at the Apex executives. "This situation is unacceptable, and it reflects poorly on Fast Track's leadership. Oliver and his team have clearly put together an outstanding proposal, and I should have ensured that the right people were presenting from the start." It was the closest thing to a public admission of failure I'd ever heard from Gregory, and honestly, it was kind of impressive. The man had enough self-awareness to recognize when his nepotism had bitten him in the ass, which was more than a lot of CEOs could say. Catherine seemed to appreciate it too, because her expression softened from considering walking out to willing to continue this conversation. "We'll need some time to review everything in detail," Catherine said, standing up and extending her hand to me, not to Gregory or Liam. "But based on what I've seen from you and your team today, Oliver, I think we have a foundation for moving forward. Someone from my office will be in touch about next steps." They shook hands all around. Well, most hands. Liam kind of got skipped in the goodbye rotation like someone at a party who'd just told an offensive joke. And then the Apex executives filed out, probably discussing what they'd just witnessed with the kind of fascinated horror usually reserved for true crime documentaries. The moment the conference room door closed behind them, the atmosphere shifted from professional presentation mode to family intervention territory. Gregory looked at Liam with an expression that somehow combined disappointment, anger, and the specific exhaustion that comes from realizing your golden child might be gold-plated at best. "My office," Gregory said to Liam. "Now." Then he looked at me, and his expression transformed into something almost resembling respect. "Oliver, give me an hour, then come see me. We need to talk." I nodded, watched them leave. Liam looking like a man walking toward his own execution. Gregory looking like someone who'd just discovered the fine print on fatherhood included teaching consequences to a 26-year-old who should have learned them a decade ago. And then I turned to my team. Maya was already packing up her laptop with that satisfied efficiency of someone whose security protocols had just been validated in the most dramatic way possible. Samira was grinning like the Cheshire Cat if the Cheshire Cat had just watched its least favorite person get professionally destroyed. Ben looked relieved that we could go back to actual technical work instead of whatever corporate theater we'd just participated in. And Priya was already making notes, probably documenting this entire disaster for future reference, or possibly just for her own entertainment. "That," Samira said, "was the most beautiful thing I've ever seen in a corporate setting, and I once watched someone accidentally reply all to the entire company with their resignation letter that included a very detailed list of everyone they hated." "We should probably not celebrate too openly," I said, though I was definitely celebrating internally. That was still Gregory's son we just watched crash and burn. Gregory's son who committed corporate theft and tried to steal credit for months of your work, Maya pointed out. because she had a very clear sense of justice and zero patience for people who violated security protocols. Don't let family dynamics make you feel guilty about protecting your own career. She was right, of course. Maya was annoyingly right about most things, which was part of what made her so good at her job, and also occasionally insufferable in that way that competent people can be when they're constantly correct about everything. The hour I was supposed to wait before seeing Gregory turned into 90 minutes, which I spent alternating between responding to emails, stress-eating vending machine snacks, and texting Rachel to give her a heads up that her brother had just experienced what could professionally be classified as a significant career setback. Her response was immediate. "What did he do?" Followed by, "Actually, don't tell me yet. I need to be sitting down with wine for this conversation." When I finally got called to Gregory's office, I walked in expecting, I don't know, maybe tension, maybe awkwardness, maybe that special flavor of discomfort that comes from having just professionally destroyed your father-in-law's favorite child. What I got instead was Gregory looking more tired than I'd ever seen him, sitting behind his massive desk like it had become a burden rather than a symbol of achievement. "Sit," he said, gesturing to the chair across from him. The same chair where Liam had probably just received the professional equivalent of being grounded for life. "I owe you an apology, Oliver." "Several apologies, actually." I sat, trying to figure out what the appropriate response was when your CEO father-in-law admits fault. "Gregory, let me finish," he interrupted, but gently. "I've spent the last hour and a half thinking about how I've handled Liam's integration into this company, and the word that keeps coming to mind is enablement. I enabled his entitlement. I gave him opportunities he hadn't earned because he's my son, and I wanted to believe he was ready for them. I ignored the signs that he wasn't prepared, wasn't putting in the work, wasn't respecting the people around him who'd actually earned their positions." He paused, looking at me with an expression that was remarkably vulnerable for a man who typically operated with CEO-level emotional armor. "And in doing that, I disrespected you. You've worked here for 6 years, earned every promotion, proven yourself repeatedly, and I still let family politics interfere with recognizing your value. That ends now. I appreciate that," I said, because what else do you say when someone admits they've been an ass and seems genuinely remorseful about it? Effective immediately, you're being promoted to Director of Enterprise Development, Gregory continued, and suddenly we'd shifted from apology territory into career-changing territory. New title, significant raise, and you'll be the primary point of contact for the Apex account assuming they sign with us. Which, based on Catherine's reaction to your presentation, seems likely. Director of Enterprise Development. That was 2 levels above where I'd been this morning. That came with the kind of business cards that had weight to them, the kind of salary that meant maybe I could finally afford to replace my 10-year-old couch, the kind of authority that meant people would have to take my ideas seriously instead of just nodding politely while waiting to talk to someone more senior. "And Liam?" I asked, because we couldn't just ignore the elephant in the room. Or in this case, the trust fund baby who'd just committed career suicide via PowerPoint. Gregory's expression hardened slightly. "Liam is being moved to an entry-level position in operations. No direct reports, no client contact, no access to strategic materials. He'll be learning the business from the ground up, the way he should have from the beginning. He's also enrolled in what I'm diplomatically calling professional development training, but what is essentially a course in humility, ethics, and not stealing other people's work. Unpaid internship in humility rehab," I said, unable to help myself. Gregory's mouth twitched in what might have been amusement. "Something like that. He's also on probation. One more incident like this, family or not, and he's out. I'm not sacrificing this company's reputation or integrity for nepotism." It was harsh but fair, which seemed to be Gregory's default setting when he wasn't being blinded by paternal pride. Liam would hate it, the demotion, the loss of status, the fact that he'd have to actually work for his position instead of coasting on his last name. But honestly, he needed it. The man had operated his entire life with a safety net made of money and family connections, and now he was learning what gravity felt like. "I know this puts you in an awkward position," Gregory continued. "Family dinners are going to be uncomfortable for a while. Rachel's probably going to be caught in the middle. But I need to know. Can you work with this situation? Can you continue to lead your team knowing that your brother-in-law is somewhere in the building learning to photocopy properly?" I thought about it for exactly 3 seconds. "Absolutely. As long as he stays away from my accounts and doesn't try to take credit for my team's work again, I think we can coexist professionally. The awkward family dinners are above my pay grade. Though I guess technically my pay grade just went up, so maybe I need to reassess. Gregory actually laughed at that, a real laugh that seemed to surprise both of us. You're going to do well in this role, Oliver. You've earned it. Not just today, but over 6 years of consistent performance. I should have recognized that sooner. We talked logistics for another 20 minutes. Transition timeline, team expansion, budget allocations, all the practical details that come with a major promotion. By the time I left his office, my head was spinning with the kind of excitement and terror that comes from getting exactly what you wanted and suddenly realizing you actually have to deliver on it. The rest of the day was a blur of congratulations, paperwork, and increasingly creative rumors about what had happened in the Apex presentation. The office grapevine had decided that Liam had either A. plagiarized someone's doctoral thesis and gotten caught, B. accidentally presented last quarter's financial disasters instead of this quarter's projections, or C. shown up drunk and tried to sell Apex a timeshare instead of enterprise solutions. None of these were accurate, but I wasn't about to correct them because the truth was somehow both more mundane and more dramatic. Samira organized a small after-work celebration at the bar down the street. Nothing huge, just the core team and a few other people who'd survived Liam's brief reign of incompetent terror. She brought cake, because apparently, every major life event required cake, and this cake had frosting that read, "Congratulations on not committing murder," figuratively speaking, which was both accurate and concerning. Speech, someone called out. I think it was Ben, but everyone was a few drinks in at that point, so it could have been anyone. I didn't prepare a speech, I protested, but Samira was already pushing me toward a standing position, so apparently this was happening whether I wanted it or not. All right, fine, I said, raising my beer in what I hoped looked like a professional toast gesture and not just someone who needed something to do with their hands. So today was insane. We caught a thief, exposed some truly spectacular incompetence, saved a multi-million-dollar deal, and I got promoted. Not bad for a Tuesday. It's Wednesday, Maya pointed out, because she was constitutionally incapable of letting factual errors slide even in celebratory contexts. Wednesday, Tuesday, whatever. Time is a construct, and today we deconstructed it. I was definitely feeling the beer at this point. Look, here's what I actually want to say. Sometimes you have to set a trap to teach someone to stop stealing. Sometimes the truth needs a stage to be seen. Sometimes the office coffee is still terrible no matter what happens. Seriously, fast track, invest in better coffee. But victory tastes sweeter when you share it with people who get sarcasm and also understand what APIs are. Are you drunk? Priya asked with genuine concern. I'm promoted, I corrected. There's a difference. One comes with business cards. I took another sip of beer and continued, because apparently I was on a roll now. Today could have gone wrong in about 17 different ways. Liam could have not taken the bait. Gregory could have sided with family over evidence. Apex could have walked out and never looked back. But it didn't, because we planned carefully, documented everything, and trusted that competence would eventually win over nepotism. Eventually being the key word, Samira added, raising her own glass. Eventually indeed. So here's to all of us, the people who actually do the work, who stay late fixing problems we didn't create, who know the difference between actual achievement and just having the right last name. Here's to Maya, who tracks security breaches like a bloodhound with a computer science degree. To Samira, who can make even our most boring services sound sexy. To Ben, who speaks fluent computer and tolerates the rest of us who don't. To Priya, who cares about button placement in a way that borders on obsessive but is always, always right. They cheered at that, and I felt that warm, fuzzy feeling that comes from either genuine affection or alcohol-induced sentimentality. Probably both. And here's to the fact that somewhere right now, Liam is probably Googling how to recover from career implosion and finding absolutely nothing helpful. I paused for the laughter. May his journey through entry-level purgatory teach him the humility his Stanford education apparently skipped. May Gregory actually follow through on consequences for once. And may we never, ever have to sit through another presentation where someone tries to pass off stolen work as strategic insight. Amen, several people said in unison, which was either very touching or a sign we'd all collectively lost it. We stayed at that bar for another 2 hours, trading stories about the worst presentations we'd ever seen, speculating about what Apex's contract would mean for the company, and making increasingly elaborate plans for how to spend our theoretical bonuses if the deal went through. Someone suggested we pool our money and buy a really good coffee maker for the office, which got the biggest cheer of the night, and also suggested we all needed to examine our priorities. By the time I got home, Rachel was waiting up with wine and questions. I told her everything. The presentation, the reveal, Liam's face when the evidence came out, Gregory's apology, my promotion, all of it. She listened with the expression of someone processing complex family dynamics, while also trying not to laugh at her brother's spectacular failure. Is it wrong that I'm proud of you and also dreading the next family gathering in equal measure? She asked when I finished. Not even a little bit wrong, I assured her. That's just the appropriate response to this situation. My brother's an idiot, she said, which wasn't news but felt important to acknowledge. And my father enabled him for way too long. I'm glad you stood up for yourself and your team. Even if it means Thanksgiving is going to be a nightmare. We could always skip Thanksgiving, I suggested hopefully. Nice try. We're going. But I'm pre-gaming with wine and preparing several conversation redirects for when things get awkward. Fair enough. Some things were above even a promotion's pay grade, and family dinner politics were definitely on that list. I closed that night with a reflection that felt important enough to remember, so I wrote it down in my phone's notes app before the beer wore off. Sometimes you have to set a trap to teach someone to stop stealing. Sometimes the truth needs a stage to be seen. Sometimes the office coffee is still terrible, but victory tastes sweeter when shared with coworkers who get sarcasm and also you're paying. Today was proof that competence wins, eventually. That preparation pays off. That doing the actual work matters more than having the right last name. And that if anyone asks, I did not plan any of this. I'm only here for the snacks. Which was mostly true, except for the part about not planning it. But what Gregory didn't know wouldn't hurt him, and what Liam had learned the hard way was that some lessons only stick when they're delivered with the precision of a well-designed honeypot and the satisfaction of watching karma do its job. Director of Enterprise Development. New business cards. Arrays that meant my plants might actually get better pots instead of living in whatever containers I could repurpose from takeout. And the knowledge that when it really mattered, when everything was on the line, my team and I had delivered. The office coffee was still terrible, though. Some things never change.